On a Halloween Eve steeped in legends and eerie occurrences, three daring friends accept a challenge to explore the cursed, long-abandoned Patterson House within its walls. Every corner conceals untold secrets, and every shadow seems to whisper ancient tales. As they step into the gloomy mansion, a simple knock on the door triggers a chilling response, making them realize they are not alone on this night. In this contest of courage against the unknown, the truth awaits those who dare to peer into the darkest depths. Halloween night cast an eerie glow over Joey's quiet suburban town. Streets filled with costumed kids, and porch lights illuminated orange and purple decorations. But at the end of Maple Avenue, one house stood in darkness, the old Patterson House. The place was a local legend. No one had lived there in years, and everyone avoided it, especially at night. Its peeling paint, boarded-up windows, and overgrown yard created a silhouette that seemed to loom, almost watching, as Joey and his friends dared each other to approach. Joey's friends, Mark and David, nudged him forward. "I dare you to knock on the door," Mark whispered, smirking. Joey looked back at the street bustling with Halloween cheer, the glow of decorations fading as he approached the darkened path toward the Patterson house. The porch steps creaked as he climbed, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew and rotting leaves. Shadows clung to every corner, and the sound of distant laughter faded into silence. Joey raised his hand and knocked, each tap echoing into the house's dark, empty interior. For a moment, there was silence. Then he heard a faint, distant knock in reply. Joey's heart raced as the faint knock echoed from inside the house, responding to his own. He stepped back, staring at the door in disbelief. His friends, Mark and David, called out nervously from the edge of the yard. "Joey, did you hear that?" Mark whispered, his face pale in the dim light. David's eyes were wide with a mix of excitement and fear, but neither of them dared to step any closer. Joey took a steadying breath. Maybe it was just an echo or a loose floorboard shifting, but something about the way the sound seemed to answer him made his skin crawl. He looked back at his friends, who motioned for him to come back, but something kept him there. Curiosity, maybe, or the thrill of the unknown. He pushed the door open a bit wider, the hinges groaning loudly. The hallway beyond was dark and smelled of mildew and old wood. His flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, but he could make out the faded wallpaper, peeling in long strips, and the dusty floor that hadn't seen a footprint in years. Everything inside seemed frozen in time, untouched and abandoned. Joey took a cautious step inside, the floorboards creaking beneath him. He glanced back at Mark and David, who were now watching with a mix of fear and anticipation. "You don't have to go in there," David called, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet night air. But Joey waved them off. Taking another step forward, the hallway led to an open parlor, where he could barely make out the shapes of old furniture draped in dusty white sheets. An ornate chandelier hung from the ceiling, its once glittering crystals now dulled by layers of dust. To one side, a narrow staircase led up to the second floor, disappearing into shadows. The whole place felt strangely still, as if it were holding its breath, waiting. Joey shone his flashlight around the room, and as the beam passed over the dusty chandelier, something on the staircase caught his eye, a faint glimmer, like a small reflection in the darkness. He froze, squinting to see more clearly, but the light shifted and the glimmer vanished. His pulse quickened as he took a cautious step closer to the staircase. Joey hesitated at the base of the stairs. His friends' muffled voices called out from the yard, but they sounded distant now, as if the house were swallowing the sound. The glimmer he'd seen could have been anything: a bit of glass, a coin, or even just his imagination. But something pulled him forward, compelling him to take the first creaking step. The staircase felt solid beneath his feet. Despite its age, dust rose in small clouds with each step, and he gripped the banister to steady himself. Its wood smooth from years of use, but now coated in grime. As he climbed, he became aware of how silent the house was, a kind of silence that pressed in on him, amplifying his own heartbeat. At the top of the stairs, he found himself in another long hallway, lined with closed doors. The air was colder up here, and a faint draft brushed past him, carrying with it the stale scent of the house. Joey's flashlight flickered for a moment, and he tapped it nervously, holding his breath as the beam steadied. He paused, feeling a sudden urge to leave, to run back to his friends and forget this whole dare. But he was here now, and the pull of curiosity was stronger slowly. He approached the first door on his right and turned the handle, the metal cool against his palm. Joey pushed the door open, revealing a small bedroom. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, and a narrow bed sat against the far wall, its mattress sunken in the middle. A wooden dresser stood by the window. Covered in a thick layer of dust, the room looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, frozen in a moment of time long past. But as he swept his flashlight over the room, something strange caught his eye. A pair of small, child-sized shoes placed neatly beside the bed, as if waiting for someone to step into them. Joey felt a chill run down his spine. The shoes seemed out of place, too new and clean compared to the decay around them. He backed out of the room slowly, not daring to look away until he was safely back in the hallway. He closed the door behind him, his heart pounding, and decided he'd had enough. But as he turned to go back down the stairs, he heard a faint sound, a soft, rhythmic creak, like the sound of someone rocking in a chair. Joey held his breath, listening. The creak was coming from further down the hallway, from behind one of the closed doors. Joey's curiosity warred with his fear, but the sound was unmistakable now. Someone or something was gently rocking in one of the rooms down the hall. He took a few cautious steps, each one slower than the last, until he reached a door at the end of the hallway. His fingers shook as he reached for the handle, pausing before turning it. The door opened with a quiet creak, revealing a larger room that might have once been a family sitting room. Dust-covered armchairs faced an empty fireplace, and a rocking chair sat by the window, slowly moving back and forth as if pushed by an invisible hand. Joey's flashlight beam landed on the chair, and his stomach twisted when he saw what lay in its seat. A small, worn-out doll, its glassy eyes staring back at him. Joey took a step back, unable to look away. The chair continued to rock, its movement slow and deliberate, and he felt the overwhelming urge to leave, to run as fast as he could. He backed out of the room, his pulse racing, and turned to bolt down the stairs. Joey stumbled down the stairs, his friends' voices growing louder as he reached the bottom. Mark and David were still waiting outside, their faces pale with worrying. "What happened?" Mark asked, eyes wide. Joey didn't answer, just grabbed his candy bag and ran, his friends following close behind. They didn't stop until they were back under the warm glow of the neighborhood streetlights, panting and clutching their candy bags as they caught their breath. Joey's hands shook as he tried to recount what he had seen, but the words wouldn't come. Mark and David peppered him with questions, their voices overlapping in a flurry of excitement and concern. "Did you see anything? Was anyone in there?" Joey took a shaky breath and nodded. There was a rocking chair, and it was moving on its own, he whispered, his eyes wide and unfocused. He didn't mention the doll or the shoes or the faint knocking from earlier. Some things felt better left unsaid, as if speaking them out loud might make them real in ways he didn't want to acknowledge. For the rest of the night, the three friends stuck to the safer, brighter streets, trying to recapture the fun and excitement of Halloween. But every time they passed a darkened house or heard a creak of footsteps from other trick-or-treaters, Joey felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, his mind flashing back to the quiet, unnerving darkness of the Patterson house. When they returned to their neighborhood, Joey's mother was waiting on the porch, waving as the boys approached. She smiled, asking how their night had been, but her face turned to concern as she saw Joey's expression. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Joey forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, just tired, I guess," he mumbled, casting a quick glance back down the street where the Patterson house lay hidden in the shadows. He knew he wouldn't tell her what happened. She'd probably just laugh it off or warn him about wandering into strange places. But Joey felt a knot in his stomach as he thought about the rocking chair, the doll, and the quiet, abandoned rooms filled with forgotten memories. That night, as Joey lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Every creak of the house, every shadow cast by the moonlight filtering through his window, seemed to pull him back to that dark, quiet hallway in the Patterson house. The memory of the faint knock answering his own replayed in his mind, growing louder with each recollection, until he finally pulled his covers up over his head, squeezing his eyes shut. For days afterward, Joey avoided Maple Avenue, even taking the long way to school to avoid passing the house. Mark and David occasionally teased him about the dare, but Joey just laughed it off, unwilling to relive the experience. Deep down, he knew what he'd heard and seen in that house, even if he couldn't explain it. The next Halloween, as decorations went up around the neighborhood, Mark and David brought up the Patterson house again, asking if he was ready to give it another shot. Joey just shook his head, feeling a chill creep over him at the mere thought of stepping back onto that porch. As he walked past the familiar street, a glint in one of the Patterson house's upper windows caught his eye. For a moment, he thought he saw the faint outline of a rocking chair, and his mind filled with the quiet creak he'd heard that night. Shivering, he turned away, promising himself that he'd never venture near the Patterson house again. Some places, he realized, are better left alone. It was getting late on Halloween night, and Rachel was alone at home, handing out candy to the last few trick-or-treaters. The usual laughter and chatter had quieted, and most of the neighborhood had turned off their porch lights. Rachel looked at the bowl of candy in her lap, noticing she had only a few pieces left. She figured she'd close up soon, but just as she got up to turn off the porch light, the doorbell rang. Rachel opened the door to find a tall, silent figure standing on her porch. The figure was dressed in an old-fashioned, tattered costume with a simple mask that covered their entire face. They didn't say trick or treat or make any sound at all, just stood there, staring at her through the mask's eye holes. Rachel forced a smile, holding out the bowl of candy. "Help yourself," she said, trying to sound cheerful. But the figure didn't move. Instead, they tilted their head slightly as if studying her, the mask's hollow eyes fixed on her face. Rachel felt a chill crawl up her spine, and her hand trembled slightly as she extended the bowl a bit closer. After a moment, the figure reached out, their hand wrapped in cloth, and took a single piece of candy from the bowl. They held it for a second, almost examining it, before dropping it into their bag. Then, without a word, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows at the end of her yard. Rachel closed the door, but she couldn't shake the strange feeling the visitor had left behind. She turned off the porch light, took the bowl to the kitchen, and tried to distract herself by tidying up. But her mind kept returning to the silent trick-or-treater with the hollow eyes. She kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see the figure standing at the edge of her yard, watching. Just as she was starting to calm down, there was a faint knock at the door. She froze, her heart pounding. The porch light was off, and she wasn't expecting anyone else. She took a deep breath and went to the door, hesitating before opening it a crack. No one was there. The porch was empty, and the street was silent. She closed the door quickly, locking it this time, and tried to shake off the growing unease. As Rachel turned away, she heard it again, a soft knock, this time from the back door. Her heart raced as she crept through the darkened house toward the kitchen. She glanced out the window, but saw only the empty yard, faintly lit by the moonlight. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination or a prank, but as she reached for her phone, the knock came again, slow and deliberate. This time it was from the window right beside her. Her pulse pounded as she slowly turned to face the window. Standing just outside, close enough that she could see the faint outline of their breath on the glass, was the same figure from before. Their mask was tilted slightly, the hollow eyes fixed on her, unblinking and expressionless. Rachel stumbled back, her phone slipping from her hand as she stared in terror. Before she could react, the figure raised their hand and slowly tapped on the glass, each tap sending a chill through her. She scrambled backward, reaching for anything she could use as a weapon. But when she glanced back, the figure was gone. The yard was empty, as though they had vanished into thin air. Rachel didn't sleep that night. Every creak and shadow in her house a reminder of the silent figure with the hollow eyes. The next morning, she went outside, hoping to find some trace of them, a footprint, a piece of fabric, anything, but the yard was empty, untouched. It was as if the strange visitor had never been there. In the days that followed, Rachel kept her curtains drawn and her doors locked, but she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, just beyond the edges of her vision, the masked figure was watching, waiting for Halloween to come around again.